There is a particular kind of quiet that only exists inside your own home, late at night when the rest of the world has finally stopped asking things of you. The lamp is low. The street outside has gone soft with distance. Maybe you are holding a cup of something warm, or maybe you are just sitting there, wrapped in the specific comfort of knowing that no one is going to knock on that door tonight. No one is going to need you to perform, to smile on cue, to explain yourself. You are just here. And here, for once, is enough. You have felt that feeling, that slow exhale that happens the moment you close your front door behind you and the world is on the other side of it. That particular relief, like setting down something heavy you forgot you were even carrying. Most people would call that simply coming home. But for you, it is something more. It is something that goes deeper than exhaustion or convenience or introversion. For you, home is not just where you rest. It is where you finally get to exist without cost. And if that sentence just did something in your chest, if it landed somewhere specific and quiet, then this is for you. Because there is a psychology to this, a whole internal landscape that most people who love staying home have never had anyone explain back to them. And tonight, that is what we are going to sit with together. Not to fix anything, not to tell you what you should want or who you should become, just to understand, just to finally hold up a mirror and say, this is what is actually happening inside you, and none of it is strange, and none of it is wrong. Let us begin where it probably began for you, long before you even knew to notice it. You were not always this person who prefers the indoors. Or maybe you were, but you did not always understand why. What you remember is this. Somewhere along the line, the outside world started to feel louder than it used to. Not louder in a literal, sound measured way, but louder in the way that matters more, emotionally, socially, energetically. Every interaction started to feel like a small transaction you were not sure you could afford. Every social event, a rehearsal for some performance you had not fully prepared for. And so you started quietly to retreat, not dramatically, not in one big collapse, just gradually in the way water finds the lowest ground. You said no to one invitation, then another. You started to feel the pull of your own space more strongly than the pull of being out in the world. You started to plan your days around the moments when you could finally come back inside. Other people did not always understand. Maybe they still do not. Maybe someone you love has said to you at some point, with a mixture of concern and frustration, that you spend too much time alone, that you are isolating yourself, that you are missing out. And you heard them. You genuinely heard them. But some part of you, some quiet, stubborn part, buried under all the nodding and the apologizing, thought, but you do not know what it costs me to be out there. You do not know what it takes just to get through an ordinary afternoon. That cost is real, and it is worth naming. Here is what tends to be true about people who find deep comfort in staying home. And here is where the psychology starts to become visible. For many of you, the world outside is not simply neutral. It is a place that has historically asked a great deal of you and given back something unpredictable in return. Maybe you grew up in an environment where you learned early that other people's moods were your responsibility, where the emotional temperature of the room was something you were always monitoring, always trying to manage, where being attuned to everyone else's needs was not a choice, it was a survival strategy. I spent so many years reading every room I walked into. By the time I was an adult, I did not even know how to stop. Psychologists would call some of this hypervigilance. That is the clinical term for what happens when your nervous system has been trained through repeated experience to stay on alert, to scan for danger, for displeasure, or the subtle shift in someone's expression that means something is about to change. It is what happens when being safe as a child or as a young person depended on your ability to anticipate what other people needed before they even asked. And when you have spent years living like that, when your baseline state in the world is one of quiet, constant monitoring, then home becomes something extraordinary. Home becomes the only place where you do not have to scan, where you can let your nervous system come down from that constant low hum of alertness, where you can simply be without it costing you anything. That is not laziness. That is not antisocial behavior. That is your body and mind doing something genuinely intelligent, seeking the conditions under which they can actually recover. Take a breath here. Let that settle. Because what we are talking about is not a flaw in your character. It is a deeply logical response to a world that may have, at some point, been a lot to manage. But here is where it starts to get more layered. Here is where the story deepens past the comfortable explanation. Because staying home heals something in you. That is true. It genuinely does. The quiet, the control, the absence of social performance, these things restore you in ways that are real and measurable and valid. But over time, something else can start to happen. Something quieter and harder to see from the inside. The very thing that saved you starts to become a kind of limitation. Not because home is bad, not because solitude is wrong, but because avoidance, even beautiful, healing, intentional feeling avoidance, has a way of narrowing the world over time. Every time you choose the safety of your space over the discomfort of an uncertain social situation, your nervous system learns something. It learns, out there is dangerous. It learns, the only place you are okay is in here. And the circle of what feels manageable starts, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to shrink. This is what psychologists sometimes call avoidant coping, and it is one of the most human and understandable patterns in existence. It is not a disorder. It is not a diagnosis you have to carry. It is simply a strategy that once worked beautifully and now, in its matured form, may be working a little too well. You might start to notice it in small ways. A friend invites you somewhere, and before you even consider going, there is a whole internal negotiation. The weight of the preparation, the energy it will take, the recovery time you will need afterward. And so, more often than not, you decline. And you feel relief, immediate, genuine relief. But under the relief, if you are honest, if you go quiet enough to hear it, there is something else. A faint, distant echo of something you are not quite willing to name yet. It shows up in relationships, too. Not always as absence, but sometimes as a subtle asymmetry. The people who love you come to you, mostly. You are easier to reach at home. You are warmer, more present, more yourself when you do not have to be out in the world. And so relationships slowly reorganize themselves around your comfort zone, which feels like it works, until the day someone tells you, gently or not so gently, that they feel like they are always the one reaching, always the one who crosses the distance. And you hear that, and it hurts, because you love them. But the distance between that love and the act of crossing toward them sometimes feels like climbing something very steep with nothing to hold on to. Here is something that is harder to say and harder still to hear. Sometimes the home you have built, the beautiful, intentional, peace-filled space you have curated so carefully, is not only a sanctuary. Sometimes it is also a way of avoiding the risk of being known. Because out there in the world, you are visible. Out there, people can see you. They can make assessments. They can find you lacking in ways you cannot control. And if you have spent your life carrying some quiet inherited belief that you are somehow too much or not enough, that the real you, seen clearly, might disappoint, then keeping yourself indoors is also, on some level, a way of keeping yourself safe from judgment. It is a way of staying in a place where you are the one who decides what gets seen. If no one really knows me, no one can really leave. That sentence. Sit with that one for a moment. Because for some of you, that is the actual architecture underneath the love of staying home. Not just sensory preference, not just introversion, but a carefully constructed distance that protects you from the specific pain of being fully seen and found wanting. And here's the thing about that pain. It is old. It is almost certainly older than you think. It likely has a face or a voice or a particular memory attached to it, even if you have spent years building comfortable walls around it. The child who learned that being visible meant being criticized. The teenager who extended themselves toward someone and was rejected in a way that left a mark. The person who trusted and was surprised by the weight of what followed. You built your home inside yourself, long before you built it in any physical space. This is the emotional peak, so stay here with it for a moment. You do not stay home because you are broken. You stay home because some part of you is still protecting a child who once got hurt by the world and decided, quite reasonably, quite brilliantly, to build walls. And those walls worked. They genuinely worked. You survived. You built a life. You found beauty inside the perimeter you created. But walls that protect a child can become a cage for an adult. And the most painful part, the truest part, is this. You already know this. You have known it for a while. You have felt it in the moments just before you say no to something your whole heart actually wanted to say yes to. You have felt it in the gap between the life you are living and the life that sometimes surfaces in your quietest thoughts. The one that includes more people, more experience, more risk, more aliveness. You are not afraid of the world. You are afraid of what the world might reveal about you. And that is a different problem entirely, and a much more solvable one. So here is where we turn, not away from the pain, but towards something that has been waiting on the other side of it. The path forward, if there is one, does not begin with forcing yourself outside. It does not begin with challenge lists or social quotas or any kind of self-improvement performance. It begins, like most real things begin, with honesty. Specifically the kind of honesty that does not require an audience. You can start to ask yourself, when did I first learn that being in the world cost more than I had? Not to blame anyone, not to excavate damage that does not need excavating, but to understand. Because understanding changes the quality of the choice. When you know that your tendency to stay in comes partly from a nervous system shaped by hypervigilance, partly from a young person's smart and reasonable decision to protect themselves, then you can start to relate to it differently. Not as a permanent truth about who you are, but as a pattern, a learned behavior, something that arrived for a reason and can be updated when you are ready. This is not who I am. This is who I learned to be. There is a concept in psychology called the window of tolerance. It describes the range within which your nervous system can handle stimulation and challenge without either shutting down or flooding. For people who have spent years in avoidant patterns, that window can become quite narrow, not because something is wrong with them, but because it has simply not been exercised. And what is true about windows is also true about comfort zones. They expand when they are gently, consistently, caringly stretched, not torn open, not forced, stretched. This means the work, if you want to call it that, is not about becoming someone who loves parties or thrives in crowds or fills every night of the week with social engagement. That is someone else's life, and you are not obligated to want it. The work is much quieter and much more personal than that. It is about finding out, slowly, carefully, with as much self-compassion as you can hold, which of your edges are boundaries and which are walls, which solitude is chosen and which is hiding, which no is self-care and which is self-protection from something that might actually be good for you. That distinction, that ongoing, honest, non-judgmental inquiry is where real change lives, not in the dramatic gesture, not in the overnight transformation, in the small, repeated choice to be a little more willing to be seen. And sometimes the very first step is simply letting yourself notice that the longing exists, because it does exist, even in you, maybe especially in you, the part of you that loves your home so much, that has poured so much love into making it a place of safety and beauty. That part of you knows what it is to care deeply about having a space that feels right, which means you are not afraid of depth. You are not afraid of intimacy. You have just been practicing it in one direction. Turning it outward, even a little, is not betrayal of who you are. It is extension of it. Take a breath here. You have been carrying this understanding for a while now. Let it settle, because here is where we land. Not at a resolution, not at a neat conclusion with all the questions answered, but somewhere true, somewhere that has the right weight to it. You are not a person who needs to be fixed. Let that be the first thing. You are a person who built an extraordinarily sophisticated system for surviving and for finding peace in a world that at some point was genuinely a lot to navigate. And the fact that you found that peace, that you created it, often entirely on your own, out of small rituals and quiet routines and the careful curation of your own space, that is not a limitation. That is proof of something. Proof that you know how to build something sustaining. Proof that you know how to attend to what matters. Proof that you are capable of extraordinary depth and care. The question is not whether you are capable of a full life. The question is whether you are willing to let the perimeter expand, just slightly, just enough, to let a little more of that life in. And you do not have to answer that question tonight. You are not required to arrive anywhere by the end of this. The version of you that is reading or listening right now is already doing something brave, already sitting with complexity instead of running from it, already choosing to understand instead of dismiss. That is not nothing. That is actually quite a lot. Maybe I do not need to be more outgoing. Maybe I just need to be less afraid of what is already inside me. There will be days when staying home is exactly the right thing, when the world is too much and your nervous system genuinely needs the quiet, when solitude is not avoidance, but restoration. There is no growth in ignoring those days. There is no wisdom in pushing through them. Some days, the bravest thing you can do is know what you need and give it to yourself without apology. But there will also be days when the door is not locked by exhaustion. It is locked by fear. When the hesitation is not tiredness. It is the old familiar story that out there is too much, that you are too much or not enough, that the cost of being seen is a cost you have already decided you cannot afford. On those days, the question worth sitting with is not whether to go or stay. It is, which version of me is making this choice right now? Is it the adult who knows their own needs and limits? Or is it the child who is still, quietly, still protecting themselves from a hurt that happened a long time ago? You are allowed to ask that question. You are allowed to not have the answer immediately. And sometimes, on those days, something very small can be the whole thing. A text sent instead of ignored. A plan made even if it later gets changed. A door opened just far enough to let a voice in. Nothing grand, nothing performed. Just a small, private act of reaching, in whatever direction feels possible. Because the goal, if there is a goal, is not a different life. not a louder one, not a more social or more ambitious or more externally impressive one. The goal, as best as it can be named here, is to make sure that the life you are living is actually chosen, that the home you return to is a place you love and not a place you hide, that the quiet you keep is a quiet you have decided on and not a quiet that has decided for you. That distinction will not always be clear. There will be long stretches where you cannot tell the difference, where what feels like peace might be avoidance and what feels like avoidance might actually be wisdom. The practice is in continuing to ask, in staying curious about yourself without turning that curiosity into another form of self-criticism. You have been hard enough on yourself already. What this needs, what you need, is not more judgment. It is more witness, more of what you are, perhaps, doing right now, sitting in your quiet space, in your safe light, listening to something that sees you more completely than most things have. More of this. The willingness to look at yourself with honesty and with something close to tenderness. Because here is the last true thing to leave you with tonight. The person who loves staying home, who has built their world carefully inward, who knows every corner of their own interior landscape the way other people know maps of cities, that person has a kind of depth that the world does not always know what to do with. A kind of richness that does not announce itself. A kind of love that goes down instead of out. That is not a consolation prize. That is not a reframe to make you feel better about something you should change. That is a genuine truth about who you are. And maybe the work of your life is not to become someone different. Maybe it is to become so completely, so honestly, so compassionately yourself that the walls are no longer necessary. Not because the world became safer, but because you finally did. The lamp is still low. The street outside has gone soft with distance. You are still here in your quiet space, the same person who began this with us. But perhaps now you are holding yourself a little differently. Perhaps now there is one more layer of understanding between you and the story you have been telling about who you are. That is enough for tonight. That is more than enough. The door will still be there tomorrow, and so will you, a little more whole than you were before you sat down.